Processing Compliance Group at Integrion. So we're going to go over today some of the pain points here, the pressure caused by third-party subpoenas, etc. Prior to coming to Integrion, I spent 25 years at Bank of America where I was in internal audit. Spent the last 10 years of my career running regulatory investigations and discovery management.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Grant, and along with Robert Daniel, I co-direct Integrion Subpoena Processing and Compliance Service Line. I've spent more than 14 years working in the legal process outsourcing space in Houston and the Carolinas, assisting Fortune 500 companies and AmLaw 200 law firms with their discovery needs. Most of that time was spent focusing on EDiscovery operations and managed document review. Thank you for having us, Colin, and thank you all for your participation, legal operators. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm not sure what everyone's experience level is with respect to subpoenas, but I felt the best way to kick this off is giving a crash course on U.S. subpoenas. In the U.S., subpoenas are governed by Rule 45 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, or the state equivalent. And there are three main types: subpoena ad testificandum, or witness subpoena, which is a court order requiring a person to appear in court on a certain date and testify as a witness, usually in a trial. The second, subpoena ducis tecum, meaning subpoena for production of evidence, is a court order requiring the person subpoenaed to produce books, documents, or other records under his or her control at the specified time or place in a court hearing or deposition. Now, oftentimes compliance can be achieved by mailing, sending records via email, or providing records at a specified date without an in-person appearance if that's arranged in advance. And then finally, we have the deposition subpoena, which is just a court order requiring a person who is not a party to a lawsuit to provide copies of business records and or appear at a deposition to answer questions asked by one party in a lawsuit. The deposition subpoena differs from the subpoena ducis tecum in that the documents and testimony requested are part of the discovery process prior to trial and may not actually be used in court for the hearing if the attorney believes it won't be useful. The category most applicable to this particular presentation is the second category: subpoenas ducis tecum served upon non-parties. Corporations constantly are being asked to provide various types of documents in their control to assist in litigation to which they are not a party and thus have no real interest in the outcome of the controversy. Stakes are high, however, because not providing the information or providing information too late could result in sanctions or motions to compel. Providing the wrong information could also result in you being pulled into court as a named party or serve as the basis for new unanticipated litigation. Plaintiffs' attorneys are very, very vigilant. And I think it goes without saying that no one likes to be unnecessarily dragged into a potential fight, especially when you have nothing to gain from it. Though the issues we're about to discuss primarily apply to subpoenas, at the heart of these issues really are deadline-driven requests for various types of information. Such requests can also appear in the form of law enforcement requests, which seek information in criminal matters, and public information requests. In essence, the subpoena, law enforcement, or public information request is just the mechanism that gets the story started. Now with that, let's just dive into why these requests are such a problem and what you can do about them. This is the part of the presentation where I date myself and I show my age. When considering the best way to illustrate the subpoena problem, two things came to mind. The first was the hit song by the band Queen and its lyric, "These are the days it never rains but pours." Third-party subpoenas and information requests have a tendency to appear more like a torrential downpour than a slow rain. The second thing that came to mind was the 1984 Steven Spielberg comedy horror film, Gremlins. If you remember, these creatures remain cute, fuzzy, and manageable as long as you adhere to three conditions. Don't expose them to sunlight, don't get them wet, and don't feed them after midnight. Third-party subpoena and information request management is a lot like that. The subpoena shows up unexpectedly, as you can see in the first picture. You open it and it appears to be relatively harmless. It's third party, so you're not directly involved in the controversy. If served properly, you have only to manage the following conditions to achieve a successful outcome. Get it to the correct responding party or group within your institution. Ensure all relevant documents are included in the response and properly redacted if necessary, and produce the documents in a timely fashion. It sounds easy enough, right? Unfortunately, if you do not have a sound subpoena compliance process, this is easier said than done. All that said, not following or improperly managing those conditions could lead you here to your worst case scenario. Your friendly, cuddly third party subpoena or information request could turn into an institutional gremlin that multiplies and terrorizes you until you find a way to get it under control. I use the word could because if this is you, there is help, as we will discuss later in the presentation. But until that help arrives, it's just a constant drain on corporate resources. So how do we get here? How does cute, cuddly, and manageable become the equivalent of the organizational behemoth? Well, they're external and internal contributors to the problem. We'll start with the external contributors, the first of which is data proliferation. Earlier this weekend, I was watching a Netflix documentary. I think it was called The Social Dilemma. And during one of the segments, a quote from the ancient Greek playwright Sophocles popped up on the screen. And the quote said, "Nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse." I'll say that again. Nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse. I'm sure most of you didn't think you'd be in a time machine today. I just took you from 2020 to 1984, and now we're in 409 BC. But in any event, his quote is really relevant to our topic. We love the convenience of technology. And let's face it, it has changed the world we live in, for better or for worse. But on the flip side of that love affair, such rapid tech advancements set off a chain reaction. Data is being generated and replicated at an alarming rate. As it happens, data sources increase and platforms and systems used to store it diversify. The more data is created, the more it can be subject to request in a legal proceeding. If you don't have a data map or response plan, completing a third-party response could lead to a game of legal hide and seek. Second to that, the data retrieval process is not always easy. You can't always simply run a search term in an internet browser to get what you need. Sometimes one must access multiple systems to retrieve the data needed to complete a production. This is especially true in the insurance context, where data through a particular date can be archived in one system, a system that's not completely decommissioned, but also not in use regularly, but also be active for a completely date range in a separate system. Another big problem is the unpredictability of the increasing subpoena volumes. This one sort of goes with the proliferation of data. Certain industries generate more data or have more records at issue than others. Corporations in the financial services, insurance, telecommunications, and tech industries create a lot of data and receive hundreds of requests daily for that data. Absent adequate staffing to handle requests, this can quickly lead to an overwhelming response backlog and increased risk of non-compliance. Although they're not listed here, mergers and acquisitions also can contribute to the problem because the owner of the subpoena response task could also inherit volumes of requests from the acquired company due to the transaction. In this case scenario, you could have your current subpoena volumes completely under control, but have your operation completely compromised by this unexpected increase in responsibilities. If there's no budget to hire additional resources to assist, this too can exacerbate the problem. Next on our list, we have the intake issues, starting with service or process. In this case, corporations are being served everywhere in every way except through their registered agents. The bigger the corporation, the more opportunities for such problems. In the case of pharmacy and retail, I've heard horror stories of cart pushers being served with process. They don't know what to do, So they just give the document to their managers, where it can often sit on the desk for days or weeks until someone figures out what to do with it or even remembers to address it. By the time that occurs, you could already be at a disadvantage with respect to your response deadlines. Registered agents. The intake process usually starts with manual coding of criteria or identifiers to ensure proper routing to an assignment by the department responsible for producing the response. Usually this initial task is performed by representatives working for your registered agent. If this information is not entered or is not entered correctly, it can also create response delays. Then there are the tech challenges. Does your platform allow for any type of workflow design? It's rare that a company has a proprietary service or process tool that accommodates all its needs. More often than not, what happens is a litigation matter management tool gets repurposed for use in subpoena response. The matter management system may not be set up to capture all the data points that are important to your organization. And if the platform lacks certain features of functionality, such as the ability to assign documents, identify or categorize escalations, route, track, report upon these activities, you could also be at a disadvantage. Absent this additional insight, your house could be on fire and you wouldn't have a single clue. Finally, there are the response deadlines and the legal and regulatory obligations. Irrespective of the increasing volumes of third-party subpoenas and information requests or the lack of staffing to handle them, the deadlines don't change. And in some instances, it's mandatory certain categories of documents be produced within prescribed timelines. As mentioned before, missed deadlines could lead to motions to compel or sanctions, increasing the overall costs associated with responding. In the context of law enforcement requests, missed responses also could result in law enforcement actually showing up at your office to obtain documents. Indian law enforcement provides a 5-day window to comply with such requests before they show up at your office, guns blazing. And then moving on, there are internal contributors to our problems, starting with departmental responsibility and task characterization. This particular topic speaks to the question of, is the subpoena response a legal task or a general business task, and who is in the best position to ensure compliance? Some have even considered it a technology operational function, believing the owner of the technology is in the best position to ensure compliance because they control access to the data. It almost seems a no-brainer that the legal department is in the best position to manage the response task. However, sometimes the decision is driven by budget and resource availability within an organization. Making a non-legal department responsible for subpoena response can create additional risk, increasing the likelihood of producing irrelevant, privileged, or proprietary data. So it seemed like, at one time, a great financial decision could have unintended effects. With respect to task ownership, is it centralized or decentralized? Is the response task housed within one department, or must multiple business units be called upon to compile and produce a request? Decentralized ownership is problematic because no one department owns the response process. It's hard to know who is responsible for what at any given moment and from whence the resources should come to address problems when they arise. And trust me, problems will arise. So many stakeholders are involved that if no one department takes responsibility for the overall process, it can lead to staffing and budgetary challenges. Then there are the issues with workflow design and inadequate tracking. I'll address these two together. If you do not have a response workflow, you have a huge problem. If you have a response workflow and if tracking and reporting are not a part of that workflow, you also have a huge problem. The lack of an established workflow causes delay and inefficiency. This is especially true where a company has a complex organizational structure and consistently high subpoena or information request volumes. A sound response workflow is absolutely essential. Having a workflow creates consistency in the response process as well as creates additional efficiencies in production. This is especially true where the same types of documents are being produced over and over again. For example, for workers' comp cases, you generally pull files from the same systems, produce and redact the same types of information over and over again. It's rinse and repeat, not a lot of deviation, and this provides the perfect opportunity to institute a workflow to ensure the quality of your production responses. If you lack tracking and reporting capabilities, it will be virtually impossible to measure your operational efficiency and control costs as well. It will be difficult to effectively manage incoming subpoena volumes, the status of such requests, whether such requests have been rejected or are in triage or production phases, identify what is or is not an escalation or whether such escalations have been addressed, understand how you're progressing if you have a backlog, or even know if more staff is required to assist you with meeting deadlines. And then finally, there's the issue of old technology and processes, or the lack thereof. Inherent here is just an unwillingness to revisit existing processes and technology and make changes. It's the notion that if something isn't broken, don't fix it, but also the notion that you shouldn't even check to see if it needs fixing. Perhaps the decision to use your matter management tool may not turn out to be the best to manage subpoena workflows. Perhaps your decision to continue to produce via mail, by paper, or CD might not be the best with respect to your productions. With a closer look, perhaps you might be better served time-wise, tracking-wise, and monetarily by producing electronically via encrypted files. But you never get there without a willingness to challenge your assumptions, ask questions, and revisit the way you have done things to improve as an organization. And this leads me to a perfect stopping point. So up until this point, I've been your resident problem child, highlighting the issues associated with subpoena response. And I'm now going to hand the reins over to my colleague, Robert, so he can be your savior.
Thanks, Mark. If we have people haven't hung up now because they're depressed, don't hang on. We're going to get positive here. So what do you do? How do you relieve all that pressure? Well, it's not one size fits all. Sorry about that, but it's not. There's different industries in pay. Again, law enforcement requests, third-party subpoenas that are coming into insurance company, a bank, telecommunications. It's going to be different. But if you get past that, look at just operationalize the process. And I know we're speaking to legal operators here, so I hope that resonates. Take this process, operationalize it. How are they coming in? Who's sending them in? How are they being tracked? Again, turn it into operational processes. And then once you have that, you get some status reporting so you know how many are coming in and where they're going. Sounds basic, but we've talked to clients that it's coming into the service of process vendor, and then it gets shotguns across the organization until something blows up. So understand where things are in the process, where the statuses are, where things are going, and what the status of those are. Again, and streamline your workflow and reduce the handoffs. Again, a lot of people from operations background on the call, but that's really key. Get your workflow documented. Put it on a piece of paper and look at all the different people that are involved in the process, where you've got handoffs. Do those handoffs even make sense? Is Mark sending a request to me? I receive that information. I turn around and I send it to Colin. Colin sends the data back to me and I send it back to Mark. Why am I involved? Look for opportunities like that in your workflow where you can eliminate handoffs, reduce a failure point, and speed the process up. And new technology. And everyone sees that, they go, I don't have any money. Well, that can be very true. But even if you don't have new technology, make sure you're using the technology that you do have and you're probably already paying for the service or process vendor, for example. And are you fully utilizing it for tracking? Are you fully utilizing it reporting? Are you the only one using it where another group that is helping you fulfill requests maybe it would help them out to see that pipeline as well. So don't think of it as just new technology, but leveraging the technology that you do have in a more efficient way. And all that sounds great, but everybody's busy. Everybody's running, trying to just do their day job. You're fighting the fire that's in front of you. So, as you're going through and looking at the workflow and finding opportunities, to improve the process and speed up your reporting, try to categorize it in quick wins. Are there things that you can do quickly that don't cost money, like adding some better reporting out of your service process vendor, so then you can better see where workflow is, and if you've got a backlog in a specific area, or even at the individual working perspective, do you have someone who's responding to 10 a day and another who's only responding to 3? Well, there may be a good reason for that. Maybe the one who's doing 3 is doing more complex, and that's great. But if you can't track it and you don't know that, how do you know when you've got a backlog within an individual person, or if you've got a subpoena type that's coming in, or a law enforcement type, or a specific record, that's actually creating a backlog? So look for those things that you can tweak and help, in a quick way. Some of those may turn into moderate effort if you're talking about programming a system, training people to use it in a different way, adding new fields, adding more data points, but still, things that can be done relatively quickly, in say a 60 to 90 day period that can make a significant impact. The ones that are going to be heavier lift are the ones where you do need a system. If you need to implement a new system and it's your Excel based, the process is embedded within people who are working on the fulfillment process, and it's not documented, that's going to be that's where you need to put a project management approach to it to create the workflows, create better policy procedures, and if you need new technology, start working toward implementing those. But those can be a heavier lift. But if you just bucket, your known issues into those 3 buckets and then start chipping away at them, then the other ones that's going to happen in every large corporation is the cross-functional challenge. We see this pretty much at with every client, regardless if legal owns a process or legal owns a third of the process, 75% of the process. The business lines or line, but most it's different lines, have different types of records. They own the records, so they're going to have to be involved in helping, identify those records, either if they give the legal subpoena team or law enforcement teams access to search their records. Usually someone from that business has got to be engaged to help pull records. And those systems may be old, they may be new, they may have challenges that legal can't fix. So there are going to be some cross-functional issues that happen, and they're going to happen regularly. But if you can start even looking at these cross-functional issues and working with those other groups within your organization that are critical to fulfilling timely and accurately, at the end of the day, if you can figure out a way to help them do their job more efficient, it helps them because they're under the same, requirements and shrinking budgets like legal as a cost center. Operation teams are generally cost centers, so they're the first one squeezed. So even the cross-functional teammates that you're working with, if you're focusing on efficiency and trying to help them and the whole process be more efficient, it can be beneficial for everyone. So, okay, so what do you tactically do? And I've covered a few of these things already, but we wanted to really focus on what can I really do now? And the first things is begin at the beginning, intake. If intake is not done timely, if you're not getting enough data points into your system at the front end, how do you know it's getting to the right place? How do you know what the status is? So really work on streamlining intake. If that's the only thing you could do this year and in the fourth quarter, maybe that's worth the effort. Probably would be worth the effort because that has a significant downstream impacts. If you can improve that streamlining of that intake process, having get routed in the right place and be able to track it, it would be a huge benefit to most people that we spoke to. And again, if you can't manage this process and track it, at the intake piece, you're really going to fall down everywhere downstream. Again, make sure your objectives are the timely receipt of the process, get it in the right person's to-do list, and get it in their their workflow. Make sure that they can track it. So then again, where subpoenas, law enforcement requests, public information requests, where are they? Who's working on them, and what are your volumes versus just finding, coming in every day and then responding to the people who are screaming the loudest. Again, efficient workflow. Once it comes in, really track it. Put it on paper. Again, look at the workflow as they come in, and if you've got a known area or a known subtype that's is causing you a problem, whether it's third party, whether it's law enforcement, public information requests. What is the thing that's causing you the most pain now? Create a workflow just around that. Focus your workflow improvement on the area that causes you the most pain right now, and then go through every step and look at it. What's manual? What systems are being used? How many people are touching it? And create a workflow that you can actually make decisions from. And again, as you're creating that workflow, look for ways that you can leverage, the technology that's already being used in different places to help you going forward and designing a better workflow. And again, look for those areas where you see a step where it's just one person sending a request to somebody else who sends it to someone else. If you take that process out, and take that middleman out, then you've already saved time. And at this point, when you're looking at your efficient workflow, if it may be a change of a process that saves 5 minutes, it may be 15, it may be 10. But if you add that to every subpoena that comes in, and you're getting hundreds of these a day, that efficient workflow starts turning into significant time savings very quickly and starts saving you money. If you can't, if you do not have the resources internally, find somebody who can come in and help with a new fresh eyes on a process and can help you, do some workflow design, look at it. Again, if you don't have the time, the money to do a full-blown scope, have someone come in and look at your known pain points and work there. And then again, look at those things that are quick hits that you could work on quickly and solve, and start moving your way forward. The other thing is, once you've got the response, another pain point that we see is how are you delivering that? And Mark mentioned it earlier. We see, people are still, believe it or not, sending out paper, and sometimes the requester is requesting it by paper. CDs are used very regularly, using those encrypted emails. And then their file share and new technologies are coming in. So really look at your response delivery, and how are you doing it? Try to move toward electronic tools, even if it's email with encrypted passwords, etc. Even that method, if you use a group mailbox for distributions, you've created a better chain of evidence that when you've sent, everyone on the team that's responding is sending them out the same way. And it gives you an opportunity to create better reporting. Shared file systems, there's a couple, 3 out there that you can use. Many of you, I'm assuming, use some type of file sharing system already with your law firms. Is that something you can use? Have you, something you've already paid for that you could leverage for distributing documents to third parties as well? These things will speed up the process, and again, try for a better chain of custody. Track your metrics. Again, if you're not tracking the metrics, how will you ever be able to manage it? So find the big data points that you do and start trying to create metrics, again, around from when it comes in, when is it recorded? Is it recorded timely? Who are the people that are receiving them? What types of requests are they working on? How many people are working on them? Can you track the average turnaround time for a certain type of subpoena or a certain type of request? If you can start working toward those goals, then you can actually manage it. Again, if you've got people who are doing 10 an hour, others are doing 5, that may be completely understandable given the types of requests they're working on, but until you can get that and see what they're working on, and if you do truly have a backup because of a performance issue, or you're just understaffed, people who are clearing 10 an hour, but that volume continues to grow. So if you can't, really need to track it so you know where you are through every stage of the process. The other thing we want to talk about is expense recovery, which everybody sets up a little bit at this point, because there are ways to recover some of your expenses, but again, it's not an easy solution. It's industry dependent, depending on the types of record and who's asking. Some industries will allow it, some others don't. It can be a regulatory agency dependent, whether they allow it, law enforcement allow it, etc. Then you've got federal and state rules of civil procedure. Generally, if you look at that, it says the wonderful comment, reasonable expenses can be reimbursed, but no one ever defines reasonable expense. So it's out there in a very general term, and it's allowed, but really, what is reasonable and what can you charge? Then you've got other state and federal issues like in banking, insurance, where every state has a state insurance commissioner, every state has state banking laws. So it's not a one size fits all. So really, you have to really look at, the industries you're in, the types of products and services, and then who's asking for data, and then can you charge? But if you haven't done the other steps and created metrics, this stage can be difficult. So you don't really know where to go, and where to start. So this is another thing where your metrics would really help you going forward. So really, we've covered a lot, I think, and in 34 minutes. We tried to make this as informative and interesting as possible, given it is a subject that generally people groan when they talk about it, because it is an issue that we very consistently see clients in these industries. It's a pain point, and the legal department is almost always involved at some level, and it changes by company. How much they are engaged and how much is under their responsibility.
It looks like we have some questions coming in. Ryan Kennedy asks, what are the best or most comprehensive agents? With respect to registered agents, we're really pretty agnostic in that regard. We can tell you that the most popular are probably CSC and CT Corp. Is that right, Robert?
Yeah. And again, they have varying degrees of capabilities, of what they can do for you, and everything has a cost. So really talk to your service process agent. What are you really paying for? Are you paying for the basic service of process functionality? Are there things that you're already paying for you don't know about? Would be the things that I would say is between those two service process vendors. That's probably 80-90% of the Fortune 1000 companies are using one of those two service process vendors. But again, the level of what you're paying them to do can be different. So understanding what you're paying for, what services they're providing, and then are you fully leveraging it would be the things I would say, because they may be very comprehensive in what they offer. But again, are you paying for it? And if you are paying for it, are you utilizing it?
That's a good point with respect to the leveraging, Robert. When you're making your selections, you really need to make sure that they're offering you what you need on the front end as well as the back end. Because if their technology isn't capturing all of your salient data points, then it's going to have a direct impact on your overall reporting.
And we've talked about reporting a couple of times already, but if again, fully leverage what you're already paying for to create the best reporting you can, and you may be able to get some reporting or more reporting than you even thought you could, using those service process vendors technology.
Question. It looks like Rob Thomas is typing a question now, but I'll jump in. If somebody's kind of new to this, can they utilize like any? Would you recommend any new legal technologies that can help support this function?
Well, because this is a growing, it's been a long-term issue, but it seems to be because of the things that Mark mentioned earlier about electronic data exploding. There are firms out there that you're starting to offer more subpoena management specific software where, again, a lot of people are taking a litigation software and trying to force subpoena management into it, where there's very little overlap. Responding to subpoenas, law enforcement requests. It's a very operational process. So there's technologies that are coming online. One of the service process vendors has started actually improving their process to help firms do more subpoena management. And then there's new technology out there on the production and receiving payment in, where you can actually require payment at the time of production, but you have to be very careful on that. Again, you need to really look at who's requesting the data. Are you allowed to charge? What are the amounts that you can charge, which can be different by state. But that's probably the newest thing out there, where you can actually request payment at the time of production and actually make sure that payment's received before you hit the send button, if you will. So that's something that's very, very new.
Oh, perfect. It looks like another question came in from Nicole Auerbach. I hope I didn't butcher your name, Nicole. Says, do you ever have to get your lawyers involved in connection with responding to subpoenas?
Well, what we see is most clients have different types of subpoenas. So the ones that are high volume, low risk, very repeatable functions, the answer would be no. If you're a bank and people are just coming in wanting John Smith's bank account statements for the last 12 months, really no need. But what we see across the board is escalation. So depending on the type of request, if they want bank statements, but then they want to see policies, procedures, they want to see email, they want voice recordings, those send up instances of flags where this needs to be escalated, where you need to get internal counsel, or if it's outside counsel, rare on a third party subpoena. But there are things that most people build into their processes that create escalation points to get an attorney involved.
The short answer is yes, because when you have a situation where you are backlogged and it's causing you to miss numerous deadlines, the requesting parties aren't shy about trying to file motions to compel and things of that nature. So it's generally at that point that in-house counsel gets involved and tries to cut that off in some way, shape, or form. What we've also noticed here recently is that the vendors who serve process on behalf of law firms will often try to challenge fees when they're allowed. They'll find little loopholes in the law or try to find loopholes in the law so that they don't have to pay for subpoena responses as well. And so in those instances, in-house counsel or field counsel also has to get involved at some level.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the question, Nicole. That was great. Rob Thomas, how successful are companies at recovering specific types of costs, like your time, technology costs, service provider costs, delivery costs, and other type of costs associated with responding?
Well, it's going to, I hate to say this, but it really depends. I mean, there are some people who are doing a pretty good job of it. They're tracking, what they're sending out. They're sending invoices and trying to collect. Others are sending invoices, and again, most of the time, this is the legal department's engaged, and they're not. Legal department is not used to being collecting bills. So most of the time, we see people are sending out an invoice based on time and the number of documents. Some of the states do allow and have some statutes that have, a specific amount that can be charged per hour and a per page charge. So invoices are generally sent out based on a combination of those two factors: the time it took to review for responsive documents, pull them, going through and doing redactions, privilege, etc. How much time did it spend on creating that production set, and then how many pages were in that production set? Was it 100? Was it 1,000? And then sending out invoices based on those two factors are primarily the ones. But then that's where it becomes very different. A lot of people are just sending out the invoices, and if what comes in, and they, presume that it's a win because they got some of their money back. But I think a lot of firms could do a lot better and increase their income here just by doing, the basics of accounts receivable, tracking who's sent and what you send invoices to, who's paid, who hasn't paid, and sending reminder notices and things like that are generally not being done. So it's about effort. After you send out the invoices, and again, legal departments rarely have people sitting around with nothing to do. But if you create a process that's repeatable to send out reminder notices when people have not paid in 30, 60, 90 days, or if you have different companies who are requesting data on a regular basis, just create some basic reporting there, and it will significantly improve your recovery cost percentages.
Yeah, and I'll just add that a lot of companies are a little bit skittish about charging for subpoena responses because this particular area of the law is relatively gray. As Robert mentioned previously, the Rule 45 pretty much says that you can charge as long as it's a reasonable charge, but more often than not, you don't get a lot of statutory guidance at the state level when it comes to actually defining what reasonableness is. In the workers' comp context, there are certain states, Arizona, California come to mind, where they actually say you can charge, 25 cents a page or 20 cents a page or whatever it is for each page of your subpoena response. But unfortunately, other state laws are not as clear cut. And so rather than even go down that road, a lot of corporations just generally treat this as an ordinary cost of doing business, and they just give the documents up. Hence what Robert said about them not really pursuing payment of the bills, even though they may try to invoice a requesting party for them. Other companies don't want to deal with the issue because they're big names and they don't want to elicit the ire of judges in their respective jurisdictions. So it's just a mixed bag.
But if you're charging 20 cents a page and $25 or $30 an hour, compare that to EDiscovery expenses, I would say that's extremely reasonable. So there again, you have to pick your battles here, and there's to come up with what you think is reasonable, and do some research, and try to start doing some billing and then doing some collection. But again, I would say that what most people are charging, which is $30 or less per hour, anywhere from 20 cents to 25, maybe 15 cents a page, that's still a very reasonable expense when you compare this to EDiscovery.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Mark. Rob, that was a great question. I hope it answered it for you. I have a quick question. If nobody else has a question, I don't see anything else coming through. Could you walk us through what like a typical use case would be for a subpoena? Just very,
Sure.
very high level.
Yep, sure. So subpoena gets served. Let's just say a financial institution, bank, broker dealer. It comes in through us. It can come in through a service process vendor. It could be emailed to the head of litigation or the general counsel. It could be sent to the CEO. It could be delivered at a local branch. So, but once it's served, then it needs to be tracked. Again, if you're using one of the service process vendors, it gets put onto a system that says, law enforcement in this jurisdiction has requested these types of records and it was received on this date. Once it gets into a system, whether it's service process or internal system, somebody's got to look at it. And generally, there's a triage process. So, and triage is looking at the subpoena and saying, okay, the records for Robert Daniel, all statements, all accounts, for this company, and then for every found account, statements going back 12 months. Well, somebody's got to look and see if Robert Daniel even has an account with that company. So there's usually a triage where we're searching multiple systems and customer lists and applications to see, is Robert Daniel truly a customer? If no, then you send a declaration of no records. You're done. If yes, then you basically have to then request, based on the person who did the triage, what different types of records were found, accounts were found, and then based on that account type, is it, I'll use a bank. Do they have a checking account, credit card statement? Do they have a mortgage? And then based on that, you have to go to each one of the records holders for those businesses to request those records. Then there's a time period where someone in that department needs to pull those records, or if you've got a team dedicated to this, they may have access to pull those records themselves. That's not consistent. But somebody's got to pull the records, then consolidate the records, and then you go into what we call production. So that is going through and making sure that it is the right Robert Daniel. And then these are actually what were subpoenaed. So maybe they didn't request mortgages, but somebody sent mortgage information. So you take that out of the production. Maybe you asked for 12 months of records or statements, you received 24. It's going through and looking at the data and only including what's specifically been asked for. Could be include looking at it for privileged personal identification information, again, based on the industry. Here, there will be different types of requirements at the production phase for redactions, privilege, etc. And then you create a final production set. Usually that's turned into a PDF. And then it is either shipped, again, hard copy, still happens, believe it or not, burned to a CD and shipped to the requester, or it's emailed to the requester with a follow-up email password, or it's produced using some type of share file system, and then it is closed for the company's perspective that you've completed the production.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what Robert said is that during the triage process, the intake specialist at that point, which is generally at the responding company, is making a determination of whether or not service or process is actually proper, that they've started upon the correct entity, because generally your registered agent is just keying in certain identifiers. They're not making the actual determination as to whether or not service or process is proper. So if the triager finds that it was not served properly, then they will issue a rejection at that stage.
A good point. And the bigger the company, that becomes very specific. So, subpoena is sent to a specific legal entity at a very large corporation, but the records are in another entity. You can reject service or a request for an updated subpoena. But yeah, it can be rejected because it wasn't served. Maybe they said they're law enforcement, but they're not actually. They didn't send enough information to prove that they're law enforcement. So it can be rejected at intake on the front end as well. Good point, Mark.
Well, thanks, Robert. Mark, thanks for entertaining me. That's pure selfish question for me to understand. it looks like Rob Thomas was going to ask another question there. He was typing. We'll give him a couple of seconds. If anybody else has questions,
Yeah, I can see your Rob's about shortening documentation requirements. Yeah, that will. I mean, there's less data there. There's less you have to pull and produce, and then that goes into then the industry and what are the regulations. So if you're in banking, you're going to have OCC, Federal Reserve. You're a broker dealer. You've got FINRA document retention notices. But at the end of the day, regardless of what industry you're in, the longer you hold data, the worse you are for both subpoenas and litigation. So, make sure people are not holding data longer than there's a regulatory or legal requirement to do so. And then, yes, that will reduce your expenses, not only in third party, but in all your litigation. Because if it's not there, you have no obligation to retain it after 5-7 years, whatever it may be. But you're holding on to it for 20, it's going to cost you more money.
Perfect. Any more questions before we wrap up? Looks like not. Mark, Robert, thank you so much. This was super insightful. Huge thank you to Integrion for partnering with us this morning, or in my case, this evening. But attendees, thank you very much for coming. I encourage you to join Legal Operators and visit the Slack channel, specifically set up for subpoena managers. We've just posted new content there, and we'll be hosting new conversations about legal response processing, delivery, and cost recovery. And we'll be posting this video as well, and PDF. If you have any questions on new topics or any topics that interest you that we should cover, reach out to colin@legaloperators.com. Mark and Robert, are you okay for follow-up questions if anybody has questions later on?
Oh, sure. Happy to. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I can share, if anybody reaches out, I can share your information. Again, everybody, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Alyssa Mills as well for organizing all this. And we'll see you next time. I'll follow up with an email.
Thank you, Colin.
Thanks,
Colin. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.